Hey guys, Aaron CybertronVGC here. In Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, the weather condition previously known as hail got changed to snow, and it got some buffs alongside with it. In this video, I'll be diving into how this may impact competitive Pokemon VGC play and giving you my first impressions on the weather condition. Weather has historically been a major staple in competitive VGC, with rain, sun, and sand all having seen major play. We'll have to see if snow can join the other weather conditions this generation. Please note that the first 3/4 of the video has some very minor spoilers regarding which old Ice-type Pokemon are in Scarlet and Violet and talks about a new move. The last quarter looks at the new Ice types in Generation 9, so there are major spoiler warnings there. There will also be a spoiler warning beforehand as well before I dive into that section, but I just wanted to let you all know. Thank you so much for watching. I've been having a lot of fun doing these videos and it would mean a lot if you could like and subscribe for more. Let's just get started. First of all, a quick overall summary. As I mentioned, hail has now been changed to snow, and when the snow is active, the major buff is that Ice-type Pokemon now get a 1.5 times boost to their defense. There's also no more chip damage at the end of the turn, and so that, in a way, is a slight nerf in my opinion. Now, in Scarlet and Violet, only one Pokemon actually gets access to Snow Warning at the moment that's in the game, and that's Abomasnow. Alolan Ninetales and Vanillix currently are not in the game, nor the Pokedex at the moment. Also noticeably missing are many Slush Rush Pokemon, such as Alolan Sandslash, Arctozolt, and Arctovish. The move Hail has now also been replaced by a move called Snowscape, and there's also a new move called Chilly Reception that, for some reason, only Slowking gets access to. This move allows you to switch out while also setting up snow. I also want to give some brief history on how Hail and Ice-type Pokemon have generally been used in competitive VGC. This is just a very abbreviated list, but yeah, to give you some sense of how Ice-types have performed historically. Now, Abomasnow is the only Snow Warning user in the game, as I mentioned, and this Pokemon actually used to be quite good way back during Generation 4. It was actually used in 2010, as it had a fairly good matchup versus Kyogre and Groudon, which were two of the most dominant Pokemon in the format back in 2010. Alolan Ninetales was quite popular when it was released in 2017, and it even finished second at the World Championships that year thanks to it having access to Aurora Veil. Lapras was a fairly strong pick in Sword and Shield since it had an excellent Gigantamax attack and was also a very viable weakness policy user. Kyurem White saw some use, and Calyrex Ice Rider was generally just very, very good throughout Sword and Shield. In general, though, Ice types have not really been that great in VGC because they just have too many weaknesses to common Pokemon such as Steel, Fire, and Fighting, and there are a lot of Pokemon that resist them as well. Trust me, this is someone who really, really loved Glaceon and actually used Glaceon in the 2012 format. One of the inherent problems is that, when you wanted to use a strong Ice-type Pokemon, like wanted to use Blizzard, you'd have to pair it with the Abomasnow. So inherently, 2 of the 4 Pokemon you're bringing are just these Ice types, and they're so easily walled by so many Pokemon. As a result, I would say that Hail-based strategies generally failed, and that's even with the introduction of Slush Rush in Sword and Shield, because it meant that you had to use multiple Ice-type Pokemon. And sadly, Ice just hasn't been a very, very good typing in competitive VGC. So now that we've said all that, how are we actually going to make Snow work in competitive VGC? Well, I think the first question to ask is, how can we activate the Snow? Naturally, there are a couple of responses here. The first is to just use Abomasnow. The second is to use Slowking's Chilly Reception, and the third is to naturally set it up using Snowscape. I think it's probably easier to start with the Abomasnow or Slowking if you're looking to build a team around Snow in early VGC. Manual Snow can work, but you have to work a lot harder to build a cohesive strategy around it. It reminds me of Sand in many ways, where Sandstorm was fairly good throughout many years, but you wouldn't actually set it up manually, you would just use Tyranitar. One thing to note that's interesting, though, is that Manual Sun and Rain have actually been solid in VGC history, but that's heavily driven by the fact that you can counter each other with it, and it would give you a major increase in damage output, whereas Snow does not give you an increase in damage output for Ice-type attacks. I do think that if you're building around Snow, you should often ask yourself if that 50% increase in defense is actually worth it to you. And you should also compare it to alternatives such as Light Clay Reflect Grimmsnarl or just a defensive Terra type. The reason I say that is because if you do want to activate Snow, like I mentioned, you'll probably have to use one of the options I listed above, and the question is, how worth it are those options for you? Is it actually worth taking up a Pokemon slot or a move slot, for example? Some early ideas for Snow-oriented strategies include Abomasnow and Slush Rush, which include Beartic and a brand new Pokemon introduced in Scarlet and Violet for sweeping potential. There's also Snow plus defensive options, so an example is Iron Defense and Body Press Avalugg for an ultra bulky Pokemon. And I was also wondering if there's any interesting Terra strategies that you can center around Snow. I think there certainly are, but with someone who doesn't have as much Terra experience right now, there isn't anything that immediately jumps to mind, and so this is where I would love to see what you guys can come up with down in the comment section below. Let's quickly take a look at all of the returning Ice-type Pokemon from previous generations in Scarlet and Violet. The first couple that I've listed here include Beartic, Avalugg, Ice-Q, and Frostmoth. I think all of these have really interesting capabilities, especially with the Snow, due to either their abilities or some of the moves that they get access to. Ice-Q and Frostmoth never really saw that much use in competitive VGC, neither did Avalugg or Beartic, to be honest, but I think with the buffs now, there's at least more room for them to operate, and with Terra as well, you can change them, into a better defensive typing throughout the battle as well. And so, yeah, I think all of these will be fairly viable in combination with Snow. Of course, there are many other Ice-type Pokemon that are returning as well, and so these are the remaining ones. Now, what's interesting is I think some of these actually have had some usage throughout VGC. For example, Cloyster, Glaceon, and Weavile all had some time to shine in their respective formats. But generally, I think that this batch maybe is not as strong as the first batch that I mentioned. But of course, you can build cohesive strategies around all of these. And so, yeah, I'm eager to see really how people can utilize Snow with all of these Ice-type Pokemon and, get value out of that defense boost. We've talked a lot about kind of general ideas, and so now I want to go more into specifics and give you an example of how players might want to run Abomasnow and Beartic, just to give you some inspiration. Now, this is being made before there's even an official VGC metagame, or we even don't know the VGC rule set quite yet, but this was just me theorying and coming up with some potential ways to hopefully give you some inspiration. The first set is a slower and bulkier Abomasnow, and this gets access to Aurora Veil, and so the idea is that you can survive, set up the Aurora Veil, and make it tough for your opponent to KO you in subsequent turns. I think you could potentially throw a Light Clay on a set like this, for example. I just have Focus Sash to cover for random Fire-type attacks from Pokemon that are faster. One thing that's interesting about Abomasnow is that, of course, you can Terra-type it to get rid of those, pesky weaknesses, but I don't know if it's really worth committing your Terra to Abomasnow. I think that if Abomasnow is more offensive, for example, it could be worth it, or if you really, really value setting up Aurora Veil, for example, but otherwise, I'm not 100% sure about it. And so, yeah, point being, though, there are plenty of different ways you can run Abomasnow. Historically, in VGC, Focus Sash and Choice Scarf were two of the most common items, and I think they'll continue to be pretty solid here in Scarlet and Violet. I think you could also run a faster Abomasnow. This just is designed to outspeed anything that is base 60 or under. That's not max speed. And yeah, you get access to Blizzard, Earth Power, Leaf Storm, and Protect, so fairly good offensive coverage. These are just two ways to run it. I think you can run Choice Scarf on it. I think you could even run an offensive Abomasnow, whether it be something like a Life Orb, an Assault Vest, for example. And once again, Terra makes it fairly interesting. But the main thing to note about Abomasnow is that its special attack and attack just are fairly underwhelming, so I'm not really sure it's worth committing your Terra type to it. Now we're talking about Beartic, which, as I mentioned, got some pretty awesome buffs going into this generation. So I can see it being utilized as a generic sweeper, either throw something like a Choice Band or a Life Orb on it, for example, and that allows you to really just maximize your damage output. One thing to note here is that with Jolly 220 speed EVs, when you have the Snow up, you're able to outspeed max speed Dragapult, which I think is a fairly good benchmark to hit, and so that's why it's just almost max speed, almost max attack, and then a little bit of HP. The second set is a Swords Dance variant. I think there are plenty of items you can use on this. I just kind of threw Citrus Berry on to give it some more bulk, but the idea here is that you are able to deal massive amounts of damage, set up a Swords Dance, but also actually have a good amount of bulk in HP. And of course, once again, if the Snow is up, then you have a defense increase as well. And so I have Swords Dance, Icicle Crash, Earthquake, and Protect on this set. And the idea is that you can be Terra Ground type, so Terra Ground, and then at +2, with that attack investment, it guarantees a one-hit knockout to 252 HP for Defense Torkoal. And I just predict that Torkoal will be fairly common in the beginning of the VGC metagame in this generation. So, that is a brief overview of my general thoughts on the change from Hail to Snow, and yeah, how I can see it being utilized early on in competitive VGC. Now, as I mentioned, I'm going to briefly touch on a bunch of brand new Pokemon introduced in Scarlet and Violet / Generation 9, so this is a spoiler warning. If you do not want to get spoiled, please just exit out of the video right now, and I appreciate you for watching this far. And for those that are interested in learning more about the new Ice-type Pokemon, let's jump into things. So Scarlet and Violet introduced a total of 4 brand new Ice-type Pokemon, and I think that these are all fairly powerful Pokemon, definitely generally stronger than most of the Ice-type Pokemon that we had seen previously. So to me, this is them trying to make Ice a lot more relevant than perhaps previous generations. And so I'm just reading up some brief notes on all 4 of these Pokemon. The first Pokemon to talk about naturally is Cetitan. Now, this Pokemon gets access to Slush Rush, and so it is one of 2 Pokemon that are currently in the Pokedex with Slush Rush. So as a result, I can see so many different strategies being built around it. The first one is actually a Belly Drum set. I think that's interesting, where maybe you have Belly Drum on a redirection user, use Follow Me plus Belly Drum on the first turn, and then afterwards, if the redirection user fainted, great, you just bring out Abomasnow, and suddenly you set up the Hail, and Cetitan is at +6 attack under the Hail, or I should say Snow. I keep calling it Hail. The second way you could use it is maybe just an Assault Vest set. This way now you have an increase to your special defense and defense. I could see it being utilized with Life Orb or Choice Band naturally as well. And I can actually even see it being used with other abilities. It gets access to Thick Fat and Sheer Force as well. So this Pokemon gets access to 3 really solid abilities. And I think as a result, there are a lot of potential sets here. One thing to note is that if you run Adamant Nature with 108 speed EVs, you will outspeed max speed Dragapult, so very similar to the Beartic kind of benchmark that I was aiming for. Yeah, the idea is to just outspeed one of the fastest Pokemon in the format, and I think that it's probably a pretty good one to outspeed because it's the difference between you hitting it for super effective damage and potentially getting the knockout onto it, or it outspeeding you. The next Pokemon to talk about here is Baxcalibur, which is one of the highest base stat Pokemon introduced in Gen 9 in general. I think this Pokemon is just generally powerful, right? It also gets access to Ice Body, which of course synergizes with Hail or Snow, but its signature ability, Thermal Exchange, is actually really, really good, so I'm not sure you actually want to give that up for Ice Body. Plenty of different ways you can run this Pokemon as well. Naturally, the ways I thought about were maybe a Dragon Dance or a Swords Dance set, for example. Use that Snow increase to survive a little bit longer with your defense. An Assault Vest set, very similar to what I was talking about with Cetitan, where it's like, okay, if you have the Assault Vest and the Snow up, it's fairly difficult to KO. A Life Orb or a Choice Band set, just like some of the sweepers I talked about earlier. And Baxcalibur actually does get access to a wider range of support moves, and so I was thinking could be interesting in combination with like Ice Body plus Leftovers, ultra bulky, and catch your opponents off guard. They expect it to just be fairly feral and offensive, and then you end up with this really bulky Pokemon. So yeah, I don't know how good that is, but just some ideas that I was thinking in my head. The final 2 new Pokemon to talk about are Iron Bundle, which is the Paradox version of Delibird, and Chiempao. One thing I want to quickly talk about here is that we currently don't actually know what the VGC rule set is even going to be for December, let alone the rest of the year, and we also don't know whether or not these Pokemon will be allowed. So I'm going to briefly touch on them, but I'm not actually 100% confident they'll be in the format when we start in a few weeks, and so the discussion on them will be a little bit shorter. Of course, once we actually find out the VGC rule set, then I'll be able to give you more in-depth analysis of all of these. Iron Bundle is interesting because it naturally synergizes really nicely with the Abomasnow. It's got base 124 special attack, so that's already really solid. And it gets access to moves such as Blizzard, Icy Wind, Aurora Veil, and Hydro Pump. This is Ice and Water type as well. And so having a way to kind of potentially threaten Torkoal and other fire types, I think is actually really, really valuable. It's got decent stats overall, but I think, yeah, it would definitely appreciate a defense boost. And then Chiempao is one of the faster Pokemon in the format with base 135 speed, and it has a really, really good base attack, but it has fairly mediocre defenses of 80, 85, and 65, so naturally Snow can give it some much needed bulk. And so, yeah, I think, like, if these Pokemon are allowed, naturally, if you want to utilize them, it does make sense to consider, hey, do I want a Abomasnow next to it? One thing that I do think is interesting, though, is that with these Pokemon, like, I can see them being used even without a Abomasnow. And I think, looking at these Pokemon, for example, Cetitan, I think, will often be paired with the Abomasnow. I think Baxcalibur can probably be used without it. I mean, all of them can be used without it. I'm kind of just thinking which ones are naturally more reliant on it. And with Cetitan, since it has Slush Rush, I think, like, that is the combination that feels, most likely. And so we're going to have to see, but I'm just excited to see how players end up utilizing all of these brand new Ice-type Pokemon, as I do think, once again, they are significantly stronger than most of the Ice-type Pokemon that we've seen previously. So, yeah. That's going to be it for this discussion video. Thank you so much in joining me, and I would love to hear your thoughts about how you think Snow will be utilized in competitive VGC down in the comment section below, and what strategies or Pokemon you're looking forward to trying out. Thanks so much as always for watching. My name is Aaron CybertronZeng. Leave a like if you enjoy. Let me know what other guides you'd like to see, and I'll catch you all next time. All right, peace.